In this lecture, we're going to talk about population ecology. So starting with populations and their properties, there's some terminology we should review. First of all, ecology is the study of relationships of organisms to one another and to the environment. So as an example of an ecological study, we can look at a specific example. So these are piles of dead loons, and there were other birds actually that were found at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore Park in Michigan in 2012. So one of the questions, of course, we might come up with as an ecologist is, how did they die? What caused all these birds to die all at the same time? And it was determined that they actually died of botulism poisoning. And botulism is caused by a toxin produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum and is typically found in very small quantities in things like honey, which is why you're not supposed to feed babies honey. They're very susceptible to very small amounts of botulism, whereas adults are typically unaffected by those small amounts. But what happened such that these birds actually contracted botulism to such a great extent that they actually died? Well, the answer to that comes from an invasive species. So the round goby is a small bottom-dwelling invasive fish. It's native to the Black and Caspian Seas in Eastern Europe, and it was first found in North America in 1990 in the St. Clair River north of Windsor, Ontario. It's invasive and has caused a lot of problems with natural populations. Researchers have linked the round goby to outbreaks of botulism in various fish and fish-eating birds in freshwater lakes, and the disease is caused by a toxin that may be passed from zebra mussels to gobies and birds, and it results in these large die-offs of fish and birds. So the origin was the Black and Caspian Sea, first found in North America in 1990, and it has multiple impacts on natural species. So the interactions between these organisms and how they interact with the environment is what we mean when we talk about ecology. So with respect to the round goby invasion, they had this botulism bacterium, and because the birds were feeding on such large quantities of these round gobies, it ended up building up to such an extent that they died. When we study ecology, we frequently study populations of organisms. So a population includes all individuals of a species that live and reproduce or survive in a particular area. And population ecology is the study of how populations interact and respond to their environment. So in general, ecologists are interested in a lot of different topics, and population ecologists specifically are interested in questions like, why are some species more vulnerable to extinction than others? What factors most affect the growth and decline of species into the future? And if we use current rates of individual survival and reproduction to model and project these variables into the future, what might that look like? Of course, there's a lot of other topics we're typically interested in, but those are three of the big ones. So there are three key features of a population. The first is the size. That's the number of living individuals in a specific place at a specific time. Secondly, we're interested in the range, the space over which the individuals occur, how widely spread they are. And their density, which is the population size divided by its range. So we want to know how crowded or dispersed the individuals are. As an example, let's look at sea otters. The global population size was originally 1 million sea otters, but by the early 1900s, the worldwide number was down to 1 to 2,000, and their decline was caused by overhunting. They have the densest fur of any animal. They have by far the softest fur of any mammal. And today there are about 100,000, with just over 3,000 in California, and that recovery of this population was due primarily because of hunting bans that were put in place to protect the species. So in British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada, the original numbers of sea otters before they went extinct are basically unknown, but we do know that 55,000 were harvested in only about 25 years. And by 1850, sea otters in Canada were considered commercially extinct. But today the BC population has recovered to about 100,000 animals, and that's again due to bans on hunting of sea otters for their fur. So as population ecologists, the second thing we might be interested in is population range. So the worldwide range of sea otters varies depending if you are considering historical range or current range. From this map on the left, you see that their historical range included large parts of coastal areas of Japan, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And that historical range, where they are no longer occurring, is shown in red all along this Pacific coast area. The current range is shown in yellow. In British Columbia, the current range is limited to the west coast of Vancouver Island and the mainland shores north of the island, although there have been recent reports of sea otters on the shores of Haida Gwaii, which is located here and is also known as the Queen Charlotte Islands. And of course, the third thing we might be interested in is the density. And density takes into account the population size and the range. So for example, the density of sea otters in British Columbia is about 6.7 of a sea otter per square kilometer. So these measurements are really useful, but it can sometimes be misleading depending on the pattern of the population distribution and where the counts are taking place. For example, if organisms occur in clumps and you sample an unclumpy area, then your estimates are going to be lower than reality. If you have a random distribution, you may also end up sampling in a higher or lower density area, which will impact your population size estimates. If the distribution is uniform, then sampling will be representative of the population as a whole. But different species have different distribution patterns, so there are different ways in which ecologists estimate the population size. Of course, one way that you can determine a population size is by counting all of the individuals. And this works for rare species where there are only a few left. This is a picture of a critically endangered red wolf from the southern United States. There are currently only about 40 surviving in the wild, and that number has decreased significantly over the past couple years. So when we're sampling to estimate population size, a variety of different methods range from very simple, for example, just counting everyone, to very complex methods. So sometimes we can provide an estimate of the population size with sampling, and this works well for sedentary organisms like plants or barnacles. And we end up counting the number of individuals within a bunch of quadrats. So we put these, here as you can see, this quadrat that we would put down on the forest floor to count specific numbers of species, and you move that around and then you estimate the population size by averaging the counts over the total area of interest. And so the population size is estimated by calculating the average of the counts divided by the area of the quadrat times the total area. Of course, another method is the mark and recapture method, sometimes also referred to as the capture mark recapture method. And individuals are captured and marked, and then they are released. And then sometimes later, a bunch more individuals are captured, and those that have marks on them from the previous capturing are marked as recaptures. And then to estimate the population size, we use the Lincoln-Peterson index, which is represented with this formula here. So the estimated population size is equal to the number of individuals that were captured on the second day divided by, of those, how many were recaptures, times the individuals that were captured on the first day. Now there are some assumptions of the Lincoln-Peterson index. For example, the population is assumed to be closed. That means there's no movement of organisms. In this case, we might be talking about butterflies moving into or out of the population. And the second thing, that every butterfly has an equal probability of capture. That means that they haven't learned to avoid the capture trap and things like that. So we have to assume that out there, every butterfly has an equal chance of getting caught.